What are all the criteria that play a vital part in determining the consumer behavior? Based on your want, based on your capacity, the utility factor will differ. Cardinal measurement is all about understanding the utility value. Good morning and welcome to the first session in Unit 4 Business Decision Theories, where we are going to speak about an important topic called as the consumer behavior. Now, consumer behavior, as all of you know, it is the interaction, it is the behavior of a customer towards the various products. But in economics, we are going to understand that consumer can be anybody ranging from an individual to a large organization, and studying and analyzing the psychology of these consumers leads to the study of consumer behavior. So what I mean to say here is that in economics, what we are going to see is the consumer preferences, his buying behavior, his parameters of how he selects a product, and what are all the criteria that play a vital part in determining the consumer behavior attitude. Followed by one of the key concepts of consumer is utility, which is the service or the product provided for the public use. So utility becomes a very important concept because this is where we are going to understand the want satisfying capacity. So overall, the consumer behavior is going to govern on certain major issues like the want satisfying capacity, how it can be done and how it can be taken forward. So moving ahead, the utility definition, it is a measure of satisfaction that an individual gets by the consumption of a product or commodity. Now let's try to understand utility will not be just something where you buy and you sell. Utility is about the want satisfying capacity. So it will measure the satisfaction of the customer. So a customer will not just buy one product one time every day. He wants to have a preference over a particular product and he continues to purchase or utilize that product until he reaches the level, the highest level of satisfaction there. That's why utility plays a very important role here. Utility will help you to analyze the entire satisfaction criteria and it will tell you how it was important in the customer's day-to-day activities. Now, in other words, it's a measurement of usefulness that a consumer obtains by using any good. So utility is a measure of how much one enjoys a movie, a favorite food or other good. It varies within the amount of desire. So it's very important for all of us to understand how this desire factor is taken into account. So many a times what happens is that you buy a good, but is that good actually useful for you? Is that good is what you are actually looking into? Does it give you any satisfaction after utilizing it? That is where utility comes into the measurement standpoint. So utility is a very big word that we need to learn in the consumer behavior. Moving further, the satisfaction of consumer is the basis of this. It measures how much one person enjoys when you buy something. So let us understand, satisfaction is everything in terms of the consumer behavior. The consumer might buy n number of products. Let's say that he buys about 100 different types of products. But not all the products will be able to give him satisfaction. There are only one or two products which the consumer really feels happy about buying it again and again. So that is where the concept of utility, satisfaction value starts coming in. So how much did I enjoy buying that product again and again so that my satisfaction levels are at the peak? So that is what we call it as the utility function altogether. Now, utility is a measure of how much we enjoy. It varies. So that's where I'd like to bring in this factor called as the variation. Utility is not a constant. It has a priority approach. It has a factor of benchmarking one over the other. So that's why utility is a very, very important concept for all of us to understand and to take it forward. Followed by the characteristics of the utility. It is dependent on human wants. Based on your want, based on your capacity, the utility factor will differ. It is not common for all. I might like ice cream, you may not like ice cream. So for me, ice cream will be on the topmost priority because that gives me a higher level of satisfaction when I consume more and more. The second thing is, it is immeasurable. It's an intangible factor. Experience cannot be told through words. It cannot be measured. Experience can be only felt. So that's exactly what happens here. It is an immeasurable property altogether. It gives a lot of push. It gives a lot of feeling and experience that a consumer goes through n number of times when he buys that particular product. The next thing, it is subjective. It is subjective. Why? Because it differs from people to people. It differs from a person to person. What a person likes might not be the same thing another person likes. So it's subjective. Subjected to certain conditions, subjected to certain persons and variety. It depends on knowledge. Very much, yes. Now, when we talk about technology, when we talk about gadgets, not everybody knows exactly how a gadget works. Not everybody understands the need for buying an Apple Macintosh or, an Apple laptop or an Apple mobile phone altogether. They have their own priority because their knowledge factor comes into picture. Somebody might feel that an Android is better than Apple. Somebody might feel that an Apple is better than Android. So what happens here is that the knowledge matters will actually play in terms of the utility value, followed by utility depends on the usage factor. How much are we using it and how much is the satisfaction that is derived by utilizing that particular product. So all these things will play a great amount of impact when you start studying this particular concept. Now, and I've also told you, being subjective, it depends on the ownership also, which means to say that the person who owns the product has got a greater amount of satisfaction that would be coming out here. So it depends on what exactly we are doing in terms of the utility factor. Moving further, the measurement of utility helps in analyzing the demand behavior of the consumer, and it's going to be measured in two ways. So in any organization, moment you talk about customers, the customers come from different background, different process altogether. They are people who are very, very happy about the factor that, yes, I have done something, so I want to keep on doing that particular activity again and again. But what happens in the long run is that it gets measured in a different parameter itself. You're not able to measure the satisfaction by just using a benchmark or a statistical tool. There are certain ways, there are certain approaches through which you can measure the utility value. Now let's go ahead and see what are the two approaches that we have in place in order to measure the utility value. Moving further, the first one is the Cardinal Approach. In this approach, one believes that it is measurable, which means we are going to talk about numbers. Why numbers matter a lot for us? Because we are all comparative personalities. Moment you look into your neighbor and you say he has 3 cars, 4 bungalows, 5 automobiles, automatically you are trying to put numbers as a comparative stand here. You want to count upon, you want to measure, you want to benchmark, you want to compare using numbers. So that's very, very important. It's a quantitative technique. So moment the quantitative technique comes into picture, it is purely a number game. So the more you start consuming, the more is the value that you start experiencing out of it. So it is a cardinal measurement. It is measured in particular utils or the particular utility value altogether. So that's why we say that cardinal measurement is all about understanding the utility value in terms of numbers. Moving further, the limitation of the cardinal approach is that in a real world, everything cannot be always measured through numbers. Now, we have many kinds of hobbies. Now, for example, what is the satisfaction you get after listening to a wonderful music? What is the satisfaction you get by doing a hobby like gardening? What is the satisfaction you get after seeing a painting? Now, these things cannot be measured by numbers. These things cannot be expressed as a unitary value. These things can be only experienced. It has to be felt inside. You have the inner factor coming in. So that's why these are certain things which will measure the value altogether. Now, the second thing is that one cannot add the different types of satisfaction from different goods. So that cannot be done at all. One cannot just add and to the satisfaction. You cannot say that A1 plus A2 plus A3 and you can't keep adding numbers like that. This is something which is more in terms of the satisfaction. For measuring it, it's assumed that utility of consumption of one good is independent of other, but in reality, it is not true. Income has got several dependent factors. Now, there are so many things that are interconnected. Now, for example, if I want to buy something, my knowledge is dependent on it. My mind is dependent, my mood is there, my heart is there. So many factors are dependent on it. You cannot say utility as a factor which is completely independent of everything. That cannot be taken into account always. So it is always important that you understand utility from one to the other factor. The second thing, it does not analyze the effect of change in price. So one will not be able to see the change in price factor coming in altogether, because they might find that what is this that we are trying to do? Why is this coming into picture again and again? So you will not be able to analyze the price change. The price change will be in terms of percentage, but then the cardinal utility might not be able to analyze that factor. Moving further, now we go to the second approach called as the ordinal approach. In this approach, one believes that it is comparable. There is a ranking methodology, which means to say, I'm now going to give you priority-based ranking, which means for me, the first priority might be money, the second priority might be family, the third priority might be education. So what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to put a figurative value in terms of comparison. So one can compare the commodities and give them some ranks. And based on the rank will be his preference, will be his satisfaction generation altogether. So what is important here, very, very important, is that you are trying to compare things from one point to the other point. You're giving a priority-based ranking. That priority-based ranking will help you to understand how the customer is giving preference to one or the other substances altogether. And that's what it matters a lot in terms of thinking. Followed by the limitation of the ordinal approach. Now, there are a lot of limitations that comes into picture. One of the thing is that it assumes that there are only two goods of basket, which is always not true. A customer might buy n number of products. So you cannot limit the value by saying that the consumer will buy only two products and he will maintain that two products always. That is not true at all. The consumer will definitely tend to vary. The consumer will have a different ideology altogether. Followed by the consumer's choice is expected to be either transitive or it is inconsistent. Now that is always not possible. Why? Because the consumer will never be consistent with his choice. The consumer's choice will depend on his mood, depend on the other people's idea, advices and other kind of loyalty factors. That's why, because it is not a numerical value, this utility is also not that easy to measure. So what has happened in economics is that though we have tried to come with two different approaches, both the approaches do not satisfy the measurement in an exact manner. You cannot measure utility with just these two concepts, because there are several factors that act on the human mind in order to make a choice. Followed by the other types is that now if you start looking here, the three types of utility that starts coming in, we are going to talk about total utility, which means the sum of satisfaction, total satisfaction that is derived by the good. So we'll have total utility is equal to U1 plus U2 plus U3, which means the total value of all the goods satisfied that is taken into account will derive us the total utility value. Followed by, now the limitation also comes in terms of the marginal value and average value. Now please look here, marginal definition is given by one extra additional value, but then what happens here is that the marginal utility talks about the change in total utility divided by the change in the total quantity. This cannot be measured in ordinal approach. So that's why I call it as a limitation altogether. Similarly, in the average also, you will be able to obtain it by total number of units. That is total utility divided by the total number of units. Again, you cannot measure units in the ordinal approach. So that's where these are the limitation factors that we can talk about. Though we have a total utility, we have a marginal, and we have an average, but still the values cannot be derived immediately. Followed by the form, place, time, possession. These are certain things which are very, very important, but this will not come under the ordinal again. Form, it refers to specific product of the company. The place, it refers to the convenience place where we are going to see it. And the time refers to the ease and availability of products and possession. Now, these format factors, though they might be a part of marketing, they might be a part of management, but then when you try to put these factors in terms of getting into the economical factor, economic thought process altogether, they might not be true. They may not be the same thing here, because you are not able to measure these factors numerically and tell that this is how the things will go. So for example, what kind of form, which place are we looking, what time zone the consumer is buying, and what kind of possession the consumer has over the product. These things cannot be explained using the ordinal approach. Followed by the limitation now gets over to the indifference curve altogether. Now when we talk about the indifference curve, this is a very, very popular alternative curve to the marginal utility, where we are able to do the indifference curve analysis. This is basically based on the consumer preferences and choice, which we are going to see in detail. Now an indifference curve is a curve that represents all the combination of goods that gives the same level of satisfaction to the consumer at any given point of time. So that is how this is the total value that is being derived by the consumer. The consumer gets complete satisfaction at various levels altogether. Now, if you see here, the properties of the indifference curve, the first one is that the indifference curve will always slope from left to right, but it will not touch the margin. It will continue to go, which means to say that this slope signifies when the quantity of one commodity in combination is increased, the amount of the other commodity will reduce. That is what we have seen. So this means to say the level of satisfaction to remain will be the same on the indifference curve. So it will continue to flow on the same line altogether. Followed by, it is always convex to the origin. You cannot get a curve other way around. It is always convex. It is not concave. Why? Because we understand that every time, as Peter substitute, a person named Peter here who substitutes clothing for food, he is willing to part with less and less clothing, but for him the priority is food. That means to say that the diminishing marginal rate of substitution comes in where you substitute one product over the other so that your satisfaction levels are maintained. You're not going to give up on the satisfaction levels. You're not going to say that, sir, that's the end of it. You are likely to part with one product and take up another product in return. So that's why we bring it, and that's where we say it is always convex in shape here. followed by the two commodities are perfect substitutes to each other, where you would see that the MRS is always a constant, that is the marginal rate of substitution is always a constant factor, followed by two goods are perfect complementary goods. That means to say that an example of such goods would be gasoline and water, where they are like a perfect substitute factor. In the case when they are perfectly complementary in nature, because the IC curve is always L-shaped and convex to the origin, followed by they never intersect. So you will never get an indifference curve like this cutting each other. This is not possible at all. You can never get an intersection because the need and the factors are unique in nature, and they always tend to be unique in taste and preference. The consumer's equilibrium, which is very, very important in order to display the combination of two goods X and Y that the consumer buys to be in equilibrium. Let us try to bring in the equilibrium factor. The equilibrium factor is shown in the indifference curve, where you will see that if these are the indifference curve altogether, there would be an equilibrium value that will come in at any point of time. So this is very, very important for us to understand the equilibrium factors that are being told here. They are meeting on the curve lines, and you would be able to see the combination of two goods coming out. Followed by, if you look here, the budget line, it's very simple. This is the first indifference curve, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, and the fifth one. They all have a common, this is that equilibrium point where the income and the price matches for a good X and Y. So this is where the consumer will try to come inside and get the equilibrium or the balances done. The most important factor that we have to remember are these two things. The income and the price has to match for the good, then only you will get an equilibrium factor. With this, I come to the end of this session. I hope and believe that all the information provided here would be of a great resource and help to you. In the upcoming sessions, we shall learn more about the theories of the consumer equilibrium and other factors. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.